I want to welcome everyone who's joining us tonight on Facebook Live and who will see this video on all of our social media platforms. My name is Ryan Delgado, and I'm with the New York State AFL-CIO. We are a federation of 3,000 public sector, private sector, and construction trades unions, representing 2.5 million workers across the state. I want to thank everyone for joining us here, and I look forward to the time that we can all be together again in person. We're here tonight because COVID has made crystal clear that our state is dependent on working people. We've always known that workers are essential, but I hope all New Yorkers now understand that as well. From the front lines to back offices, from food service to mass transit, from retail to delivery and everywhere in between, workers are carrying us through this pandemic. Far too many have paid the price with their lives and their well-being, while many others are paying the price with their own livelihoods. Yet, if the state doesn't act very soon, those same workers and the valuable jobs they're providing will be jeopardized. The revenue that the state and local governments receive has been diminished, and without new sources, workers will pay the price, and the services they rely on will as well. This is regardless of what happens with the federal government and any emergency relief that comes in any COVID bill. We've had funding issues routinely, even in the best of times in New York. And that is because we have to fix our broken state revenue system. First, we're going to hear from Ron Deutsch, Executive Director of New Yorkers Fiscal Fairness. Ron is going to provide a briefing on the problem and potential solutions. Then we will hear from union members, hardworking New Yorkers from all across the state and from all different lines of work, to discuss the impact of the pandemic and underscore the need of new revenue sources. Before we jump into the program, I also want to point you to an action that you can take after tonight's forum. There's a link address that should be on the screen. It's bit.ly/can't-cut-way-out. That's bit.ly/can't-cut-way-out without the apostrophe. We ask all of you to contact your representatives. They need to hear your voice loud and clear. Also, if you have any questions, please email information@nysaflcio.org. If we can't answer during the program, we will follow up after the fact. I want to thank you all again. And now I want to turn it over to our first speaker. Ron, take it away.
Thanks, Ryan. And thanks everybody else for being here tonight. We really appreciate your time. This is a very important issue right now. I'm very happy to be back with New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness, fighting for tax equity and tax justice in New York State. So what I want to do is spend just a little bit of your time going through a bit of a presentation that we pulled together that really deals with the kind of backdrop that we're facing during this horrible pandemic and these difficult economic times. So I am going to quickly share my screen, and we're going to talk a little bit about meeting the moment. Right now is our moment, and we need to raise the revenue so that we can fund our future. So right now, come on, advanced slide. There we go. Sorry about that. So right now, New York State is ranked number 5 in terms of unemployment. We have about an 8.1% unemployment rate, which, sounds high because it is. A year ago, in December 2019 through December 2020, New York State has lost 1 million jobs. We're down about 10% in terms of overall jobs. The largest share of those being in the leisure and hospitality industry of around 366,000, then education and health at about 157,000. But really, no one's been unscathed by this. We should also note that about 98% of the people that lost their jobs during this pandemic, 98% of those folks are making less than $68,000 a year. So this is not a problem that's affecting very wealthy families throughout the state. This really is a problem that's been affecting working people in New York. And we're also ranked number 2 in terms of COVID deaths, right? We've had 45,000 of our fellow New Yorkers die as a result of this pandemic. And certainly we've seen the great racial and social disparities that exist during this period, right? We know that people of color are literally twice as likely to die of COVID in our state. And that should be unacceptable as well. And sadly, we're number one. We continue to be number one in income inequality. Right? That's the gap between those that earn the most and those that earn least in our state. And we've had that dubious distinction for quite some time now, despite the fact that many of us have been fighting on this front for a really long time. We should also talk about the fact that we've literally seen decades of disinvestment in New York State, whether we're talking about the Pataki era or Governor Patterson making billions of dollars in cuts after the financial collapse in 2008, or Governor Cuomo, who's really been pushing a 2% state spending cap, which has resulted in disinvestment in many different programs and services. We've also at the same time seen wealth exploding for people at the top of the income spectrum. You know, New York is home to the largest number of billionaires of any place in the nation, right? New York City has 118 billionaires. Those folks have seen their income since the pandemic began increase by about $88 billion. Think about that, right? While everybody else is struggling, New York's billionaires have actually seen dramatic returns on their income. So while the wealth is exploding for the top 1%, sadly, the rest of us are left to pick up the pieces. Now, Ryan talked a little bit about federal aid, right? We know that now, you know, since we have President Biden in office and Chuck Schumer has assured us that we're going to be getting substantial federal aid, and that is great. New York absolutely needs it, right? So, but the problem is it's a one-time kind of Band-Aid for a problem that's going to last many, many years. It's not going to be that long-term support that we really need. So we know that as we look into the out years, fiscal years 23, 24, and 25, we're looking at $32 billion in budget gaps for those years. So again, while we have some federal aid coming in, it's only going to help us for about 2 years. And then we're going to have to address those huge budget gaps on our own. And those budget gaps are occurring at a time when we have been disinvesting and we have long-term needs, whether it's around education or public services, public health, housing, climate, jobs, you name it. We need to invest in our communities in order to grow and prosper. So that's why we are all kind of pushing for the state to generate a sufficient amount of revenue. You know, we could be looking at a variety of different ways to get at that revenue. We know that Wall Street is doing very well, that big corporations like Amazon are doing exceptionally well right now. People with very high incomes, the ultra millionaires in our state, are doing very well. And again, our billionaires have seen their wealth increase dramatically during this period of time. And there's precedent for doing these types of revenue raisers during bad times, right? Every downturn that we've had in the economy or every major tragedy in the last 3 decades, whether it was 9/11 or the financial meltdown on Wall Street in 2008, you know, the legislature has come together and sought to increase revenue in order to make up for the dramatic losses. And they have done so by asking the wealthy to contribute a little bit more. And we think that's certainly very reasonable. One of the problems that we face is every time we talk about taxing the wealthy, people talk about them fleeing or it hurting the economy. We know from numerous academic studies and talking to economists, you know, folks like Joseph Stiglitz, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, he's the first to say during an economic downturn, you should not be cutting programs and services. People desperately need them. And it hurts the economy worse, quite frankly. So the reality is what we should be doing is pumping money into our economy. And the best place to get that money is from those who are doing exceptionally well. So I think all economists really agree that asking the wealthy to contribute more during one of these economic downturns is the right thing to do. The other issue that we're going to face in terms of asking the wealthy to pay a little bit more is that the wealthy are going to flee, right? That's what we hear all the time. whenever we talk about raising taxes on the wealthy, the first thing you hear is, well, we can't do that because they're just going to leave New York. Well, guess what? We did it in 2009, again, because we needed revenue so desperately. And you know what? Millionaires did not flee. In fact, the number of millionaires since 2009 has actually doubled in New York. So we went from 28,000 millionaires to 57,000 millionaires in New York. So this notion that somehow the wealthy are going to flee is really overblown. Why do people move? People move in search of economic opportunity. The wealthy have found their economic opportunity. So I'm more worried about working class people leaving this state because they can't afford to make ends meet or they're not getting the services that they need, rather than the wealthiest fleeing, right? The wealthy have found their economic opportunity and they are connected to their communities in a number of different ways. They're not going to pick up stakes and leave. And finally, I'd just like to note that we do have some serious income inequality, and the wealthiest 1% on average pay a smaller share of their income in state and local taxes than do the middle class or the poorest of New Yorkers. And that's something we absolutely have to address, right? That's not fair, it's not just, and it's not right in a progressive, quote unquote, progressive state like New York. So, when so many people are in pain and suffering, there really is no reason why we shouldn't be asking the wealthiest among us to contribute a little bit more. And I think that's what we're really talking about. We're not talking about soaking the rich or pushing them out of New York State. We're asking them to help their fellow New Yorkers. And I would also say that it wasn't that long ago that we got 100 millionaires to sign on to a letter saying that they would not leave New York and they supported higher taxes on themselves to address this situation. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back to my friend, Ryan Delgado.
Thanks, Ron. Our next speaker, who I want to introduce, is from NYSUT. Courtney Smith worked at special needs school in Long Island as a teacher's assistant before pursuing a career in teaching. She's a certified to teach in childhood education, grades 1 through 6, and special education. She was laid off this year due to decreased enrollment due to COVID and funding. Courtney, thank you for being with us tonight.
Hi, thank you for having me. So my name is Courtney Smith. I am a former special education teacher at the Children's Learning Center in Roosevelt, New York. So I did work there for 4 years as a teacher's assistant before getting certified to teach. And in September 2019, I was hired to teach a 612 classroom setting, and I worked with students that had severe disabilities. So in March, due to COVID, our school moved to complete remote learning, and I continued to modify my lessons for my students to learn online, which we continued throughout the summer sessions. So this past September, I was laid off, along with many others in our school, due to low enrollment. The districts were not referring families to schools like the Children's Learning Center because they felt they can be taught remotely and through the district. So my students, they have severe needs, and even before COVID-19 occurred. And now it only intensified during this past year, not being able to learn in person. Basically, without the funding for these schools, the students are unable to receive the proper education and supports and services that they desperately need, now more than ever.
Thank you so much, Courtney.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Desmond Reeves. Desmond is a certified nursing assistant at Central Park Rehabilitation in Syracuse, New York. She's a delegate for 1199 SEIU and the mother of 4 children. Desmond, thank you for everything you do each day and for speaking here tonight.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. Like he said, I've been working as a certified nurse assistant for 20 years. I've been in the same facility. I'm sorry, my camera's, excuse me. I've been in the same facility for the past 20 years. And before the pandemic hit, We were already facing issues of poor care, quality care for the residents. And, excuse me, and I'm sorry. My computer keeps going out. I can't see.
We hear and see you, Desmond.
Okay. So as I was saying, I've been an employee there for the past 20 years. And before the pandemic, it was already hard enough. You know, we didn't have enough staffing. The quality of care, it was a lot of issues. And when the pandemic did hit, there were a lack of PPEs. There were not enough resources for us to actually take care of our residents. And it became so stressful that the people in my facility, we tried to come up with solutions to figure it out. We tried to come up with these ways on protecting us and our patients, okay? It just didn't work, but thank God for 1199, we were able to fight. We were able to establish some rights, even though management refused to give us hazardous pay, you know, and I have a 4-year-old who I'm concerned of bringing things home. I have to make the decision, should I work full-time or drop down part-time, you know, and it's sad that the wealthiest of us are not paying their fair share. They have to pay their fair share, you know, in order for us to move on. And just every day in the facility with the staff not knowing or being informed on what's going on, the decline, it just declined. People just left. You know, it was stay home, take care of your family, opposed to coming to work every day because you didn't know what to expect, you know? So we had to make those decisions, and I was one of them. I had to drop down from 20 years of service to part-time, from taking care of people that I love, okay, and just sitting back and letting this go on. But I am a delegate and I am 1199 strong, and we're here to fight, and we're going to make sure that the wealthiest pay their fair share. Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond, and thank you really to all the workers here that are speaking tonight. It's not always easy to tell your story, but it's valuable and it's important, and we thank you for it. I next want to introduce Debbie Hayes, who's the Area Director of CWA District 1 in Buffalo, New York, a professional nurse since the late 1970s. She's the original organizer and first president of CWA Local 1168. Thank you, Debbie, and we appreciate you being with us tonight.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of CWA tonight. We represent over 65,000 workers in New York State in a number of industries that range from telecommunications to healthcare and higher ed, manufacturing, broadcast television, printing newspapers, and those in the public sector. And thousands, literally thousands of our members are essential frontline workers, but none more so than those that provided direct care to patients during the COVID-19 crisis. And, you know, for those of us that work in the industry, we knew that even before COVID-19 crisis that our healthcare system had been cut to the bone in this state. So after years of budget cuts and Medicaid and Medicare reductions and the excessive regulation in the state, our facilities were on the verge of collapse. And then you put on the pressure that was caused by the pandemic, and we had healthcare workers that were working dangerously short-staffed. Some had 7 to 10 COVID patients on a shift, which it was physically impossible to provide the care that they needed. They didn't have the PPE that they needed to protect themselves in all instances, and they didn't have some of the equipment they needed to care for the patient. So it is truthful to say that we had patients die in New York State because we were not prepared for the pandemic. And it is so distressing to me that while we had New Yorkers dying, unemployed, waiting in food lines, for the first time in their lives, that we have billionaires that increased their wealth by almost $90 billion. That's absolutely ridiculous to me and unacceptable in a state like ours. So I feel like we have to raise additional revenue on the wealthiest of New Yorkers. CWA always has and will continue to support a variety of tax increases and closing corporate loopholes. And I know that an overwhelming number of New Yorkers support tax fairness. So I feel like we're at a critical point in our history here. We have this huge budget deficit hanging over our heads. And I truly believe that we can't cut our way out of it. There's nothing left to cut. And we have to take the opportunity now to face this crisis head on and fix our broken tax laws. And I'll tell you, if we don't, it's bad for New Yorkers, and we'll have more people die, and essential services will be lost, and the working class and the poorest people in our state will be the victims. They'll pay the ultimate price. So like the sister before me, we're here to fight, and we will do whatever we can to help increase revenue and bring tax fairness to New York.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I want to remind folks that we need everyone to take action by contacting their state legislators, and they can do that at bit.ly/can't-cut-way-out, and that's without an apostrophe in can't. Our next speaker is from the IBEW. Richard Mcfadden is a business rep for IW Local 3 in Westchester County. Richard is a third-generation member of Local 3 who currently resides in Pleasantville, New York with his wife and their 4 children. Richard, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate the time and the opportunity to be here. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about infrastructure, our state's infrastructure, New York City's infrastructure. Being a member of the building trades for 30 years, many of our members in the trades work on a lot of these projects. So I took a little time earlier today to familiarize myself with New York State's infrastructure report card. There's a national one and the state has one. Simply put, infrastructure is the basic equipment and structure that's needed for a county, a state, or a region to survive. It's really simple. Infrastructure makes up our roads, our transit system, our power grid, our parks, wastewater, aviation, what else? Dams, bridges, and tunnels. So when I looked at the New York State report card, which is a little dated, mind you, New York, the Empire State, received a C-. Now, if I came home with a C- in high school, my father always said to me, could you do better? And the answer was always yes, we could do better. If we're going to be the Empire State, we have to do better. Our people, our residents of the state deserve it. One of the things I did notice that wasn't in the infrastructure report card was green technologies and renewables. All these things are interlocked together in producing for a vital economy, not just locally or in our state, but nationally. Just think of all the interstate corridors and the Amtrak going through our state, water lines, gas lines. All this is critical. I think Superstorm Sandy reminded how fragile infrastructure is. And even since then, the smallest storm can come through a community, knock out power, water, or a gas line, and you're left devastated for quite some time. Recently, you could look at Houston. What happened in Houston because of the storms there? 10 days without power, and then that led to frozen pipes. People are still without water, if I'm not mistaken, and the whole state is ill-equipped, and not to their own fault. There's not enough material to repair the residential problems they have, their plumbing problems in particular. So, you know, I don't know really how much I want to expand on it all, but when you think about how critical it is, nobody really thinks about infrastructure until it's not there, until there's a problem. Just like in your home, you don't think about calling a plumber until the toilet doesn't work. You don't think about the electrician until a circuit breaker or something trips. It's real simple. It's certainly one of those things we take for granted every day. We're all guilty of it. But it's not, if you're a mass transit type of person, you take for granted how easy it is to get around New York City until all of a sudden the train doesn't show up. And then you're late for work, or you can't get there, and a lot of it is old, is aging. That's the biggest thing I get from this report. New York City in particular, being such an old city, subway systems, tunnels over 100 years old, tunnels underneath the Hudson River, over 100 years old. And if you lose any one of them, any one of those vital links that connect the tri-state area, it'll have a ripple effect to our national economy. So I would just, you know, like to focus on that, as there's so many members in the building, both public and private. After these things are built, the public sector takes over and maintains them and operates them. So there's jobs on both the public and private side of this issue. So this funding, you know, has to come, has to keep maintained for a critical infrastructure that cannot go unnoticed and underfunded, because we'll all pay the price at the end. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you. Our next speaker is from CSEA. Bev Healy works in the Schenectady City Schools in Schenectady, New York. Bev, thank you. I know you had other demands this evening and appreciate you making time for us.
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you here. I really appreciate it. My group with CSEA and many CSEA workers are community-facing people. We work directly with the community. Without the services that we provide, things would not run smoothly. This pandemic has shown a lot of the economic disparities that the American workforce is facing right now. Before the pandemic hit, I think they said there's like 43 million Americans that are living in poverty. I hate to see what the numbers are now with the situation that everybody is facing all the time. My recent experiences has shown that women, especially Black and brown women, have faced layoffs. Others have had to make the difficult choice and the decision to resign their jobs so that they could stay home to help educate their children because of the closures of all of our schools. Other people have had to reduce their hours in order to be able to support their children being educated. And for many of the women that were fortunate to keep their jobs, they have to had to take on the task of being supporting their child's education as well as running their households. I think that a lot of the ground that women have made in the workforce recently has definitely taken a step backwards here. And I think it's going to really have a long-lasting impact on our economy. The needs for all of our organizations are great. But I really think we need to place emphasis also on supporting our schools and our local governments and our childcare institutions. If we do not, we're going to continue to see the rise in poverty throughout our workforce. The stresses that are being placed on people to juggle everything, lack of food, food insecurity, and the lack of a decent wage, not being able to work full time, not having great benefits, is placing a lot of physical and mental strain on my fellow coworkers. I feel like some people are losing hope. They feel like they're not going to be able to attain the what we consider the American dream. Everyone who's working hard really should be allowed to earn a livable wage, to receive an education, to move forward in providing for their families. And when they're able to do that, they're actually providing for society as a whole. I feel strongly that it should not be this difficult to live a decent life here in America, one of the richest countries in the world. And I think we have to, remember to keep in mind that without all of us here doing the work that we do, society would not run properly. So thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bev. We're happy to be joined by Michelle Maloney, who's a member of UFCW Local 1. Michelle is a frontline worker at Tops Markets in Syracuse, New York. She's been a union member for the past 36 years and held numerous positions with the union, including steward for 17 years. Michelle, thank you for sharing your story.
Hi, my name is Michelle, and as he said, I've been in this business for 36 years. The UFCW Local 1 represents us. They've done a great job in trying to push for the proper PPE equipment with all my fellow coworkers. But during this time, when we talk with tax fairness, I think your top executives, most of them do not put themselves in harm's way. It's all their fellow workers, and that can be in any one of the fields that we've just discussed. And I've had workers that have come to me that have either cut their hours or have taken time off due to their concern for their own safety and or their families. And at that time, they're losing money because they're cutting their hours or taking time off. So the tax fairness is appropriate because they don't understand that they have a whole bunch of workers that every single day choose to put themselves in harm's way. And they should pay what they should pay to help out and make it easier for all of us and the people that aren't working. We would think that they would all step up, and maybe we can also force them to with a few pushes from all of us. And but they should step up and help out. I think some of them too, some of my fellow employees are concerned with their own health and having to take more time off. I've had numerous ones come back up to me and say, with it expanding in central New York and the numbers as they were rising just in the past couple months, that they did take time and took leaves of absences. And as much as they have family medical leave, those don't necessarily help pay all the bills. They're not as much as they were making if they were working. So I do think that they should step up and the revenue should be spread a little more evenly. And thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Before we go to our next speaker, again, I want to remind people that they can take action and contact their legislators if they just visit a site that we have set up. It's bit.ly/can't-cut-way-out, and there's no apostrophe in can't. Again, it's bit.ly/can't-cut-way-out. Our next speaker is Dan DiClemente, who's the president of AFSCME, the Board of Education Non-Teaching Employees Union. He's with Council 66, and he represents the support staff for members of classrooms throughout Rochester City School District. Dan is also a member of the State Fed Executive Council, where he provides valuable insight to us all. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Ryan. I'd like to talk about so we had 215 food service workers and security workers who work for the Rochester City School District who were laid off in October. But to go back in time a little bit, during the first wave of the pandemic, the school shut down in March of 2020. And when the school shut down in Rochester, they kept some of them open for food distribution sites. And we had food service workers, we had security workers at those sites working on the front lines. People didn't know much about the virus at the time. So we had to really fight to get our workers masks and other proper PPE. And they worked throughout the year, throughout the summer, even providing food to needy families. And in October, they were rewarded with, and by the way, under the first wave of the pandemic, the district, the superintendent, the board, all made a decision that we're going to pay non-teaching employees throughout this pandemic. But when the second wave came around, there was a new superintendent. We have a fiscal monitor from the state who oversees our district now. And the district decided to lay these workers off. Not only did they lay them off, but the 89 food service workers who were left behind all had their hours slashed in half. Many were demoted in title. And it's really hurt the morale of the people who are they're city residents. They send their kids to city schools. Our food service workers and security workers are minorities who live in the city and send their kids to city schools. And when the schools shut down this year, the district made a decision not to take care of those workers. They live paycheck to paycheck. They don't work during the recesses or get paid during the recess periods. So it's been really devastating for those families. And to point to what Ron talked about in the beginning, this one-shot aid doesn't help. Last year, the Rochester City School District got $29.1 million from the federal government in CARES Act funding, and the governor shorted our aid $29.1 million from the state. You know, the campaign for fiscal equity, that decision stated that the Rochester City School District is owed $86 million in funding. With charter schools, the expansion of charter schools, it's just difficult to compete with public education being shorted throughout the years by the state. And it's something that needs to change. It's something that needs to change by doing the kind of things that Ron talked about, by raising taxes on the wealthiest people in the state. The bottom 95% of taxpayers in New York State still pay a higher percentage of their incomes in taxes than the top 5% do. I mean, just think about that. So we really need to get the wealthiest Americans to pay their fair share. They benefited greatly under the Trump tax giveaway, and it's time they paid up and supported the people that we represent, the people on the front lines every day, people who don't make a great deal of money, people who live paycheck to paycheck, who can't afford to get their hours cut or get thrown out of their apartments or get the heat turned out. And that's what we're talking about here. So I agree with everything this panel has said, and it's been great to meet so many members throughout the state who are experiencing the same things.
Thank you, Dan. I would like to next introduce Jane Camissa, who's a nurse at Westchester Medical Center. She's a NISNA board member and the Hudson Valley Westchester area leader. Jane, we could not be more pleased that you're with us tonight. And I think it's fair to say nurses have inspired us all during this pandemic. Thank you again.
Thank you for having us. I sit here and talk to you on behalf of the 42,000 nurses at New York State, the New York State Nurses Association. 2020 was the year of the nurses, and what a year it was. We were already in a very deep hole prior to this COVID pandemic. Since last spring, our healthcare resources have plummeted further as sickness was on the rise. This is no time to cut resources. The cuts will be counted to be further lost lives. If we had safe staffing at the bedside, more lives would be saved. Everybody that has spoken before me, it is heart-wrenching what has happened to the citizens of New York. The executive budget puts forward cuts in billions to healthcare funding in the midst of this pandemic. The cuts proposed strike at the heart of New York's most vulnerable patient population. This is short-sighted. Reducing healthcare will only make portions of the state population sicker and acuities greater. It invites only a greater healthcare crisis. Bold solutions are needed to meet the real needs of New Yorkers. It is a myth that the rise in income and business taxes drive New Yorkers out of New York, as our first speaker already said. Safe staffing makes sense in two fundamental ways. It provides standards of care for all New York hospitals, the great equalizer of care, and it saves money over time. It saves, just this week, a study co-authored by Linda Aiken of the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing said that nursing staffing issues in the 2 years prior to the pandemic shows that lives could have been saved and costs curtailed. We have been fighting for years to have safe staffing at the bedside, and all the fights in 2020 with the PPE fights, if we had the correct ratios at the bedside, we would have not only saved money, we would have saved lives. There's also, the recent with the nursing home deaths with the Attorney General just proved our point once again. It cannot be done on the backs of working class Americans and New York State. We are at a crucial crossroads. New York State is among the most inequitable state in the United States. It has to stop. COVID has shown that this has to stop. NYSNA is behind all of the actions taken to further reduce and tax the rich to make the inequities go away. I thank you for allowing me time to speak. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Jane. Our last speakers tonight are going to discuss food insecurity. Mark Emanation from the Capital District Area Labor Federation and Willie Terry, a retiree from Troy, New York, will talk about the impact that this pandemic has had on families trying to make ends meet. They are passionate about the issue, and I thank them for lending their voice to this critical issue today.
Thanks, Ryan. And brothers and sisters, I'm very happy to be here tonight. Last week, I participated in 4 mass food distributions that fed 2,200 families. Over 12,000 people got fed. On March 18th, the coalition that we've built, the unions, with the Regional Food Bank, with people of faith, with community groups, with civil rights groups, on March 18th, we'll do our 100th mass food distribution, modern day food lines, bread lines, in the richest country in the history of the world, and in New York State, which if it was a country, would be the 9th richest country in the world. I've seen people come up to these lines that have been habitually poor, that didn't recover from the last 2008, 2010 recession. I've found people that lost their jobs in March, sold their car, sold their jewelry, out of every single thing, and then come sheepishly and embarrassed up to the line to get food. A grandmother whose daughter got sick in Florida and sent her 5 children on a bus. The oldest one was 12 years old, sent them up to here, and the grandmother said, without this food, I don't know how I would feed them. The poverty level, the federal government says for a family of 4 is $25,400. If you make $25,401, you're no longer poor. There's not a place in New York State, urban or rural, that one person could live on $25,400 a year with the prices of everything. This work has been great. You get done with one of these things, you work real hard for 4 or 5 hours, and you say, I feel great. This was wonderful. What a group of people doing this. Then you feel sad that you had to do this. And then you feel angry, really angry, that this has to happen in a state that could afford to feed its people, give them jobs, give them living wages, give them benefits for the people that need it. So one thing that we had is we have tons of union members working on this. We have wonderful union retirees working on this. And I've been at a lot of them. I see people that I recognize from meetings, from unions that are up there helping, but also sometimes getting food. And one labor activist I'd like to introduce, longtime labor activist and retiree, Willie Terry. is somebody that both helps at these food pantries and occasionally goes to these food pantries so his family can get by. So Willie, I turn the floor over to you. Well, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, my name is Willie Terry, and I'm a labor activist and a community organizer in the Capital Region. I'm also a member of CSEA Retiree Local 999, and I'm an active member of the Coalition of Black Trade Unions. I cite those things about me to say that even though I am still active and have a limited income, my family and my community, we still need the support of food pantries to survive in this crisis. Since this pandemic, the grocery bills for our family have doubled. Our gas and electric, transportation, internet, medical, rent, cell phone, food, and childcare bills all have increased during this pandemic. Now, those multinational grocery stores and chains, such as Walmart, Market 32, and others, they didn't lower their prices due to this pandemic to aid people who have lost their jobs or who have limited income or those who don't make a living wage. Having a good, decent, healthy food is very important for our school-age kids, my grandkids, and community members. Our kids are spending more time at home due to this pandemic. This means that they are eating more. Kids are our future, and we have to provide for them. The other groups that are suffering to put food on the table are senior citizens like me and low-income workers in our community. We need pantries and food distribution centers during this time of crisis. These programs help keep our community afloat in these difficult times. And this is why it is so important for New York State and the federal government not to cut back on social programs that impact the poor and working people during this crisis, but to provide more funds for these programs. Now, we are one day out of the February celebration of Black History Month. And one of the most famous people we remember during that month was Frederick Douglass, who was a social reformer and abolitionist, who was born into slavery, but escaped to become a national leader. Frederick Douglass gave a speech on August 3rd, 1857 in New York, in which he said, quote, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." And he ended that speech with saying that power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will. Now, I quote him to say that we as working people, we are not begging that the government does something to alleviate the suffering of people during this crisis. We are demanding that the government provide relief for the people in America during this crisis. And if they don't, then we are prepared to, as Frederick Douglass said, to struggle for our demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Willie. And I want to thank all the panel tonight for sharing their stories. And I want to thank everyone on Facebook Live and everyone who's going to watch this video on our social media platforms. Tonight, we've heard what New Yorkers are going through right now, and we also heard the solution. Now it's up to all of us to make it happen. We need everyone to contact their elected officials and tell them that we need the state to invest in working people. We need new revenue, and we need it now. And the way folks can do that, again, is by visiting bit.ly/can'tcutwayout. That's bit.ly/can'tcutwayout. Thank you all once again, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night.